Welcome to an unprecedented look at our legal system. What you are about to witness is completely unfiltered and unedited. Prepare yourself for raw, authentic footage captured directly from the front lines of justice, where truth is the only objective.
Please!
My documents are valid!
I'm a nurse! My baby! I need help!
Hands behind your back now! This is a federal detainment!
She's in active labor. You cannot move her like
It
this.
hurts! Please, I think I'm going
No
into
one moves her
labor.
without my order! Stand!
The security camera footage from that Tuesday morning would later become Exhibit A in what legal experts called one of the most shocking civil rights violations ever caught on tape. At 8:23 a.m., federal agents stormed through the doors of Metropolitan Medical Center, their boots echoing down sterile hallways as they made their way toward the maternity ward. Their target was a 9-year-old registered nurse who was 9 months pregnant and scheduled to deliver her first child within days. What happened next would expose a system so broken, so fundamentally flawed, that it would cost taxpayers $17 million and change federal policy forever. The woman at the center of this nightmare was named Carmen Rodriguez, and she had dedicated her entire adult life to helping others. She worked the overnight shift in the labor and delivery unit, holding the hands of frightened mothers, monitoring vital signs, and celebrating new life entering the world. For 3 years, she had been the kind of nurse that patients specifically requested, the one who remembered birthdays and stayed late to comfort families during difficult deliveries. Carmen had come to the United States when she was 7 years old with her parents, who were fleeing violence in their home country. They had applied for asylum immediately upon arrival, following every legal procedure, attending every court hearing, and maintaining their temporary protected status for over 2 decades. Carmen had grown up American in every way that mattered. She graduated valedictorian from her high school, earned her nursing degree with honors, and had been working legally under a work authorization document that was renewed every 2 years without issue. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Carmen had worked a 12-hour shift that ended at 7 a.m., but she stayed an extra hour to help train a new nurse on the unit. Her supervisor, Sarah Chen, later testified that Carmen was one of the most dedicated employees she had ever supervised. Carmen was exhausted and looking forward to going home to rest before her next shift. Her husband was picking her up because driving had become uncomfortable in her final weeks of pregnancy. She was gathering her things from the break room when she heard heavy footsteps in the hallway. Through the small window in the door, she saw men in tactical vests approaching. For a moment, she thought there might be some kind of security issue with a patient or visitor. Hospitals occasionally dealt with domestic violence situations or psychiatric emergencies that required law enforcement assistance. Carmen had seen it before and knew the protocol. But these agents weren't responding to a hospital emergency. They were there for her. Agent Robert Kellerman of Immigration and Customs Enforcement had received a tip 3 days earlier that an undocumented worker was employed at Metropolitan Medical Center. The tip came through an anonymous hotline that ICE had set up to encourage workplace raids. Someone had called and specifically mentioned Carmen's name, claiming she was working illegally and should be investigated. What the caller didn't mention, and what Agent Kellerman failed to investigate, was that Carmen's work authorization was completely current and valid. A simple database check would have shown her legal status, but Kellerman was under pressure from his supervisors to increase deportation numbers, and he had been criticized for not conducting enough workplace arrests in recent months. Carmen represented an easy target, someone he could arrest quickly and add to his statistics. The agents burst through the break room door without knocking. Carmen looked up from her locker, confused and startled. Agent Kellerman immediately ordered her to put her hands where he could see them. Carmen complied, asking what was happening and explaining that she was a nurse at the hospital. Kellerman told her she was being detained for questioning regarding her immigration status. Carmen calmly explained that her documents were in her purse and that she was legally authorized to work. She offered to show them her papers. Instead of examining her documentation, Kellerman ordered her to turn around and place her hands behind her back. Carmen asked if she was under arrest and what charges were being filed. Kellerman didn't answer her questions. He simply repeated his order to turn around. Here's where the situation became truly disturbing. Carmen was visibly pregnant. so obviously close to delivery that she had to support her belly when she stood up. Any reasonable person could see that she was not a flight risk and posed no threat to public safety. But instead of treating her with the basic dignity that any pregnant woman deserved, the agents handled her like a dangerous criminal. They handcuffed her hands behind her back, which immediately caused her severe discomfort because of her advanced pregnancy. The weight of her belly pulling forward while her arms were restrained behind her created intense pressure on her lower back and abdomen. She told the agents that the handcuffs were causing her pain and asked if they could at least cuff her hands in front of her body. Agent Kellerman refused. Carmen asked to speak to her supervisor or to call her husband. She explained that she needed to let someone know where she was going and that she had a doctor's appointment scheduled for later that day. The agents denied both requests. They told her she would be taken to a federal facility for processing and that she could make phone calls later. But Carmen's ordeal was just beginning. As the agents escorted her through the hospital corridors, her co-workers watched in shock and horror. Nurses and doctors who had worked alongside Carmen for years couldn't believe what they were seeing. Dr. Jennifer Thompson, the chief of obstetrics, tried to intervene. She approached Agent Kellerman and explained that Carmen was a valued employee who was scheduled to deliver soon. Dr. Thompson offered to verify Carmen's employment and legal status. She asked the agents to wait while she contacted administration and retrieved Carmen's personnel file, which contained copies of her work authorization documents. Agent Kellerman told Dr. Thompson to step aside and not interfere with federal law enforcement operations. He threatened to arrest her for obstruction if she continued to intervene. The hospital's security chief, Michael Brooks, was called to the scene. He had worked in law enforcement for 15 years before taking the hospital job and understood both police procedures and federal immigration operations. Brooks immediately recognized that something was wrong with this arrest. He asked to see the agent's warrant or court order authorizing Carmen's detention. Agent Kellerman produced a generic administrative warrant that gave ICE authority to arrest individuals suspected of immigration violations. But the warrant was not specific to Carmen and did not authorize her arrest based on any individualized probable cause. Brooks pointed this out and suggested that the agents verify Carmen's legal status before proceeding. Kellerman became increasingly aggressive. He told Brooks that ICE didn't need permission from hospital security to conduct immigration enforcement and that anyone who interfered would face federal charges. The confrontation was escalating, and Carmen was caught in the middle, standing in handcuffs while experiencing increasing discomfort from her pregnancy. Dr. Thompson made another attempt to help. She approached Carmen and asked how she was feeling. Carmen said she was having some cramping and that the handcuffs were making it difficult to breathe properly. Dr. Thompson immediately became concerned about Carmen's medical condition and the potential stress being placed on her unborn child. She turned to Agent Kellerman and explained that Carmen needed immediate medical evaluation. She said that the stress of the arrest, combined with Carmen's advanced pregnancy, could trigger premature labor, which could endanger both mother and baby. Dr. Thompson offered to conduct a quick examination to ensure Carmen's medical stability before she was transported anywhere. Agent Kellerman dismissed the doctor's concerns. He said that Carmen would receive medical attention at the detention facility if needed, and that the arrest could not be delayed for medical evaluations. This response shocked everyone present. Here was a licensed physician expressing genuine medical concerns about a pregnant woman's immediate health, and a federal agent was refusing to allow basic medical care. Carmen began experiencing more severe cramping. She told the agents that she thought she might be going into labor and needed to be examined immediately. She asked to be taken to the labor and delivery unit upstairs where her colleagues could monitor her condition. The cramping was getting stronger and more regular, and she was genuinely frightened that the stress was causing complications with her pregnancy. Instead of taking her medical concerns seriously, Agent Kellerman accused Carmen of faking symptoms to delay her arrest. He said that detention facilities dealt with pregnant women regularly and that she would receive appropriate care once she was processed. He ordered his partner to continue with the transport immediately. Dr. Thompson stepped forward again, this time more forcefully. She stated clearly that, as a physician, She could not allow a woman in potential labor to be removed from a medical facility without proper evaluation. She said that doing so would violate medical ethics and potentially endanger 2 lives. She threatened to call the hospital's legal department and report the incident to federal authorities. This is when Agent Kellerman made his biggest mistake. Instead of listening to the medical professional or taking a moment to reconsider his approach, he doubled down on his aggressive tactics. He told Dr. Thompson that she was interfering with a federal investigation and that he would arrest her if she didn't step aside immediately. The confrontation had drawn a crowd of hospital staff, patients, and visitors. People were recording the incident on their phones, and the story was already starting to spread on social media. Carmen stood in the middle of it all, handcuffed and in obvious distress, while federal agents argued with medical professionals about whether she deserved basic human dignity and medical care. Have you ever witnessed something like this happening in your community? Type yes in the comments if you have. The situation was about to escalate in ways that nobody could have predicted, and the consequences would echo far beyond the walls of Metropolitan Medical Center. The hospital's chief administrator, Elizabeth Warren, arrived on the scene within minutes of being alerted by security. She had been dealing with administrative duties in her office when she received an urgent call about federal agents arresting a pregnant employee. Warren had run hospitals for over 20 years and had never encountered anything like this situation. She immediately understood the legal and medical implications of what was unfolding. Warren approached Agent Kellerman with the authority that came from decades of healthcare leadership. She introduced herself as the hospital administrator and requested to see the specific legal documentation authorizing Carmen's arrest. She explained that the hospital had strict policies regarding law enforcement activities on their premises, and that any arrest of an employee required proper coordination with administration. Kellerman showed Warren the same generic warrant he had produced earlier. Warren examined it carefully and pointed out that the document did not specifically name Carmen or provide individualized probable cause for her detention. She explained that federal courts had consistently ruled that such broad warrants were insufficient for workplace arrests without additional evidence of criminal activity. Warren then produced a folder containing Carmen's complete employment file. The documents clearly showed Carmen's valid work authorization, her social security number, her tax withholding records, and her clean background check. Every piece of paperwork demonstrated that Carmen was legally authorized to work in the United States and had been properly vetted by the hospital's Human Resources Department. She handed the file to Agent Kellerman and asked him to review the documentation before proceeding with the arrest. Kellerman barely glanced at the papers before handing them back. He stated that ICE would verify Carmen's status during processing and that the arrest would continue regardless of what the hospital's records showed. This response infuriated Warren. She had just provided clear evidence that their employee was working legally, and the federal agent was refusing to even consider the documentation. She told Kellerman that the hospital would not allow an employee to be unlawfully arrested on their premises and that she was contacting the facility's legal counsel immediately. Meanwhile, Carmen's condition was deteriorating rapidly. The stress of the confrontation, combined with standing in handcuffs for over 30 minutes, had triggered increasingly severe contractions. She was now experiencing regular cramping every few minutes and was having difficulty catching her breath. Sweat beaded on her forehead, despite the cool hospital air conditioning. Nurse Patricia Williams, Carmen's closest friend on the unit, had been watching the situation unfold with growing alarm. Patricia had assisted with hundreds of deliveries and immediately recognized the signs that Carmen was going into active labor. She pushed through the crowd of onlookers and approached Dr. Thompson with urgent concern in her voice. Patricia explained that Carmen's symptoms were consistent with the early stages of labor and that immediate medical intervention was necessary. She pointed out that Carmen was experiencing classic signs of distress that could indicate complications with the pregnancy. Patricia begged Dr. Thompson to override the agents and take Carmen directly to labor and delivery for emergency evaluation. Dr. Thompson agreed immediately. She turned to Agent Kellerman and stated in her most authoritative voice that Carmen required immediate obstetric care and could not be transported anywhere until her medical condition was stabilized. She explained that removing a woman in active labor from a medical facility could result in serious complications or even death for both mother and child. Agent Kellerman's response shocked everyone present. He accused the medical staff of conspiring to help Carmen escape federal custody. He claimed that they were exaggerating her symptoms to interfere with law enforcement operations. He threatened to arrest anyone who attempted to provide medical care to Carmen without his explicit permission. This threat crossed a line that no one at the hospital was prepared to accept. Dr. Thompson had taken an oath to first do no harm, and she was not about to let a federal agent prevent her from providing emergency medical care to a patient in distress. She looked Kellerman directly in the eyes and told him that she would not allow him to endanger 2 lives for the sake of an immigration arrest. Carmen's contractions were now coming every 3 minutes and were becoming increasingly intense. She was doubled over in pain and could barely stand upright. The handcuffs were cutting into her wrists as she instinctively tried to support her belly during each contraction. She was crying now, both from physical pain and from fear about what was happening to her unborn child. Patricia Williams made a decision that would later be hailed as heroic. She stepped between Carmen and Agent Kellerman and announced that she was taking Carmen to the labor and delivery unit immediately. She said that no federal agent had the authority to prevent emergency medical care and that she would physically block anyone who tried to stop her from helping her patient. Kellerman reached for his radio to call for backup, but Warren intervened before he could make contact. She informed him that the hospital was activating its emergency protocols and that security was being directed to protect medical staff and patients from any interference with medical care. She said that federal agents were welcome to remain on the premises, but they would not be allowed to prevent medical treatment. The situation had reached a critical breaking point. Carmen was clearly in active labor and needed immediate medical attention. Hospital staff were prepared to defy federal agents to provide that care. Agent Kellerman was faced with the choice of escalating the confrontation or allowing medical professionals to do their jobs. Instead of making a rational decision, Kellerman chose escalation. He radioed for additional ICE agents and local police backup. He declared that the hospital staff was interfering with a federal investigation and that anyone who helped Carmen would face criminal charges. He ordered his partner to maintain physical control of Carmen and prevent her from being moved to any other location. The partner, Agent David Morrison, was clearly uncomfortable with the situation, but felt obligated to follow Kellerman's orders. Morrison had children of his own and could see that Carmen was genuinely in distress. He approached Kellerman quietly and suggested that they allow medical evaluation before proceeding with transport. Kellerman angrily rejected the suggestion and ordered Morrison to prepare Carmen for immediate removal from the hospital. Carmen's water broke. The amniotic fluid soaked through her scrubs and pooled on the floor around her feet. There was no longer any question that she was in active labor and required immediate obstetric care. The sight of the fluid breaking galvanized the medical staff into action. Dr. Thompson pushed past Agent Morrison and began examining Carmen on the spot. She checked Carmen's pulse, which was elevated, and assessed the timing of her contractions, which were now coming every 2 minutes. She announced to everyone present that Carmen was in active labor and required immediate transport to the delivery room. Patricia Williams grabbed a wheelchair from the nearby nurse's station and positioned it behind Carmen. She and another nurse began helping Carmen sit down despite Agent Morrison's protests. The nurses were no longer asking permission from the federal agents. They were providing emergency medical care to a patient who needed it, and they made it clear that nothing would stop them. Agent Kellerman drew his weapon. The sight of the gun sent shockwaves through the crowd of hospital staff and visitors. People screamed and began backing away from the confrontation. Security guards immediately radioed for police assistance and began evacuating non-essential personnel from the area. Dr. Thompson looked at the gun pointed in their direction and made a decision that would define her career. She told Agent Kellerman that he could shoot her if he wanted, but she was not going to let a woman deliver her baby in a hospital hallway while handcuffed. She continued her medical assessment of Carmen while staring directly at the federal agent who was threatening her with a deadly weapon. Carmen was now experiencing the most intense contractions of her labor. She was gripping the sides of the wheelchair and breathing heavily through each wave of pain. She looked up at Dr. Thompson with tears streaming down her face and whispered that she could feel the baby coming. She begged the doctor not to let anything happen to her child. The standoff continued for several more agonizing minutes. Federal agents with drawn weapons faced off against medical professionals who were determined to provide emergency care. Carmen sat between them, laboring while handcuffed, as her baby prepared to enter a world that had already shown such cruelty and indifference to their existence. Hospital Security Chief Brooks had been coordinating with local police throughout the confrontation. The first patrol cars arrived just as Carmen's contractions reached their peak intensity. The local officers immediately assessed the situation and recognized that something had gone terribly wrong with what should have been a routine immigration arrest. Sergeant Lisa Rodriguez of the Metropolitan Police Department took charge of the scene. She had 20 years of law enforcement experience and had never encountered federal agents threatening medical personnel with weapons. She approached Agent Kellerman and demanded an explanation for why he had drawn his gun in a hospital setting. Kellerman claimed that hospital staff were interfering with federal law enforcement and that he was authorized to use necessary force to complete Carmen's arrest. Sergeant Rodriguez looked around at the scene and saw a pregnant woman in active labor being denied medical care by federal agents. She told Kellerman to holster his weapon immediately and allow medical personnel to provide emergency treatment. When Kellerman refused, Sergeant Rodriguez made a decision that would later be praised by civil rights advocates nationwide. She placed Agent Kellerman under arrest for endangering public safety and interfering with emergency medical services. She ordered him to lower his weapon and submit to local custody pending investigation of his conduct. The confrontation between federal and local law enforcement added another layer of chaos to an already unprecedented situation. Agent Morrison found himself caught between his partner's arrest and his orders to maintain custody of Carmen. He looked around at the armed police officers, the determined medical staff, and the laboring woman in handcuffs, and finally made the right choice. Morrison holstered his weapon and stepped aside to allow medical personnel access to Carmen. He told Dr. Thompson that she could provide necessary medical care, but that he would remain present to maintain federal custody. It was a compromise that probably saved lives and allowed the immediate crisis to be resolved. Dr. Thompson and Patricia Williams immediately began wheeling Carmen toward the elevator that would take them to the labor and delivery unit. Carmen was experiencing contractions every minute now and was showing signs that delivery was imminent. The medical team moved quickly but carefully, knowing that every second counted in ensuring a safe delivery. As they reached the elevator, Carmen grabbed Dr. Thompson's hand and squeezed it tightly. Through her pain and fear, she managed to say thank you for not abandoning her when she needed help the most. Dr. Thompson squeezed back and promised that everything would be okay, that they would take care of both Carmen and her baby no matter what happened next. The elevator doors closed, carrying Carmen toward the delivery room where she would finally receive the medical care she desperately needed. But the damage had already been done. The trauma of being arrested while pregnant, threatened with weapons while in labor, and denied basic medical care would have consequences that extended far beyond the delivery room. Agent Kellerman was released from local custody within hours, but his troubles were just beginning. The incident had been recorded by multiple witnesses and was already spreading across social media platforms. Videos of federal agents threatening pregnant women and medical personnel were generating outrage from coast to coast. Carmen delivered a healthy baby girl 3 hours after reaching the labor and delivery unit. The delivery was complicated by the stress she had endured, but both mother and child survived without major medical complications. Carmen held her daughter for the first time while still technically in federal custody, a surreal moment that captured the absurdity of the entire situation. The legal consequences of that Tuesday morning would unfold over the next several years, ultimately resulting in one of the largest civil rights settlements in federal history. But more importantly, Carmen's ordeal would expose systematic problems with immigration enforcement that demanded immediate attention and reform. immediate attention and reform. Within 24 hours of Carmen's delivery, the story had exploded across national media. The video footage captured by hospital staff and visitors showed federal agents threatening medical personnel with weapons while a pregnant woman labored in handcuffs. The images were so shocking that even conservative news outlets struggled to defend the agents' actions. Cable news networks ran the story continuously, with legal experts calling it one of the most egregious civil rights violations they had ever witnessed. Carmen's husband, Luis, had arrived at the hospital expecting to pick up his wife after her shift. Instead, he found his pregnant wife under federal guard in the maternity ward, having just given birth while technically in custody. Luis was a construction worker with no legal background, but he immediately understood that something terrible had happened to his family. He contacted the only lawyer he knew, a family friend who handled immigration cases. Attorney Maria Santos had been practicing immigration law for 15 years and had seen countless examples of ICE overreach. But when Luis described what had happened to Carmen, Santos initially thought he must be exaggerating or confused about the details. No federal agent would arrest a pregnant nurse from a hospital without proper documentation, she thought. No one would deny medical care to a woman in active labor. The story seemed too outrageous to be true. When Santos arrived at the hospital and spoke with witnesses, she realized that Luis hadn't exaggerated anything. If anything, he had understated the severity of what occurred. Santos immediately began documenting everything, interviewing hospital staff, collecting video evidence, and photographing Carmen's injuries from the handcuffs. She knew this case would require the best civil rights attorneys in the country. The hospital's legal department was in crisis mode. Corporate executives were fielding calls from reporters, federal officials, and their own board of directors demanding explanations for how such an incident could occur on their premises. The hospital's insurance company was already calculating potential liability exposure, and the numbers were staggering. Dr. Thompson had become an overnight sensation after video of her confronting armed federal agents went viral. Medical professionals across the country were praising her courage in standing up for her patient and her profession. The American Medical Association issued a statement supporting her actions and condemning any interference with emergency medical care. But Thompson was struggling with the aftermath. She had spent her entire career focused on bringing new life into the world safely, and she couldn't shake the image of Carmen laboring in handcuffs while agents threatened everyone around her. She had trouble sleeping and found herself constantly checking on Carmen and the baby during her rounds. The nursing staff was equally traumatized. They had witnessed one of their colleagues being treated like a criminal for no apparent reason, and many were questioning whether they could continue working in an environment where federal agents might target them at any time. Several nurses reported receiving threatening phone calls after their names appeared in news coverage of the incident. Agent Kellerman was placed on administrative leave pending investigation, but he remained defiant about his actions. In interviews with internal affairs investigators, he insisted that he had followed proper procedures and that hospital staff had interfered with legitimate law enforcement operations. He claimed that Carmen had been faking her labor symptoms and that medical personnel had conspired to help her avoid arrest. His partner, Agent Morrison, told a different story to investigators. Morrison admitted that he had been uncomfortable with Kellerman's aggressive approach from the beginning and that he had tried to suggest allowing medical evaluation before proceeding with transport. He described feeling trapped between following orders and recognizing that something was fundamentally wrong with the situation. Morrison's testimony would prove crucial in the subsequent legal proceedings. His admission that even ICE agents on the scene recognized problems with the arrest undermined any defense that the agents had acted reasonably or within proper guidelines. The ICE field office that employed Kellerman was under intense scrutiny from Washington. Congressional representatives were demanding hearings, and the Department of Homeland Security's Inspector General had opened a formal investigation. Internal emails obtained through Freedom of Information requests revealed that Kellerman had been under pressure to increase arrest numbers and had received criticism from supervisors for not being aggressive enough in workplace enforcement. These revelations painted a picture of an agency culture that prioritized statistics over human dignity and proper procedures. Kellerman wasn't necessarily a rogue agent acting on his own. He was a product of a system that rewarded arrests regardless of their legitimacy or the methods used to achieve them. Carmen remained in the hospital for 3 days following delivery, both for medical reasons and because of the ongoing federal custody issues. ICE officials were scrambling to figure out how to handle a case that had become a public relations nightmare. They couldn't simply release Carmen without admitting that her arrest had been improper, but continuing to pursue deportation proceedings against a new mother who was clearly authorized to work would generate even more negative publicity. During those 3 days, Carmen's room became a focal point for supporters from across the community. Nurses from other hospitals brought flowers and offered assistance. Immigration advocates held vigils in the hospital parking lot. Local politicians visited to express their support and promise legislative action to prevent similar incidents. Carmen was overwhelmed by the attention but grateful for the support. She had spent years caring for others in their most vulnerable moments, and now she was experiencing that same compassion directed toward her and her newborn daughter. The contrast between the cruelty she had experienced from federal agents and the kindness shown by her community was stark and emotionally overwhelming. Luis struggled to balance caring for his wife and newborn child with dealing with the media attention and legal proceedings. He was a private person who had never wanted to be in the public spotlight, but he understood that speaking out about Carmen's treatment might prevent other families from experiencing similar trauma. The legal team assembled to represent Carmen was formidable. Lead attorney Rebecca Martinez had won landmark civil rights cases against federal agencies and understood how to hold government officials accountable for constitutional violations. She was joined by specialists in immigration law, civil rights litigation, and federal tort claims who worked together to build a comprehensive case. Martinez's first step was filing an emergency motion to clarify Carmen's custody status and ensure that ICE could not attempt to deport her while legal proceedings were ongoing. The motion included affidavits from hospital staff, copies of Carmen's work authorization documents, and medical records showing the trauma she had endured during her arrest and labor. The federal judge assigned to the case, Judge William Harris, was known for his careful approach to civil rights matters and his intolerance for government overreach. When he reviewed the evidence and watched the video footage of Carmen's arrest, his reaction was immediate and decisive. He granted an emergency restraining order prohibiting any further ICE enforcement action against Carmen pending resolution of her civil rights claims. Judge Harris also ordered ICE to produce all documentation related to Carmen's case, including the anonymous tip that had triggered the investigation, internal communications about the arrest, and any policies or training materials related to arresting pregnant women. The discovery process would reveal the full scope of the problems within the agency. The anonymous tip that had started everything turned out to be particularly troubling. Investigation revealed that the caller had provided false information about Carmen's immigration status and had specifically targeted her by name. Phone records showed that the call had come from someone with access to hospital employee information, suggesting that Carmen had been deliberately targeted by someone who knew her personally. This revelation added another dimension to the case. Not only had federal agents failed to verify basic information before conducting a dramatic arrest, but they had acted on what appeared to be a malicious, false report designed to harm Carmen specifically. The implications for other immigrants who might be targeted by similar false accusations were enormous. Carmen's medical records from the delivery showed clear evidence of the trauma she had endured. Her elevated stress hormones during labor had required additional monitoring and intervention. The handcuff injuries to her wrists took weeks to heal completely. Most concerning were the psychological evaluations that documented symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder related to her arrest and the threats she had witnessed. The baby, thankfully, showed no signs of lasting harm from the ordeal. But medical experts testified that the stress Carmen experienced during her arrest could have easily triggered complications that might have endangered both mother and child. The fact that both survived without major medical issues was more a matter of luck than good planning by the federal agents involved. As the legal case developed, more victims of similar ICE tactics began coming forward. Carmen's story had given others the courage to speak about their own experiences with immigration enforcement overreach. The pattern that emerged showed that Carmen's case, while extreme, was part of a broader problem with how federal agents conducted workplace arrests. A construction worker described being arrested at a job site in front of his co-workers despite having valid documentation in his truck. A teacher told of being handcuffed in front of her students during a workplace raid that found no violations. A restaurant worker recounted being detained for hours without access to food, water, or bathroom facilities, while agents verified information they could have checked in minutes. These stories painted a picture of an enforcement system that had lost sight of basic human dignity and constitutional protections. The legal team representing Carmen began organizing these victims into a broader class action lawsuit that would address systematic problems rather than just individual incidents. The media attention surrounding Carmen's case had also attracted the interest of federal legislators who were already concerned about immigration enforcement practices. Senator Elizabeth Warren announced plans for congressional hearings on ICE accountability. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez called for investigation of the specific policies that had led to Carmen's arrest. These political developments added pressure on federal agencies to resolve Carmen's case and implement reforms that would prevent similar incidents. The Department of Homeland Security announced a review of all policies related to arresting pregnant women and conducting enforcement actions in sensitive locations like hospitals. But Carmen and her legal team weren't interested in promises of future reform without concrete accountability for what had already happened. They wanted financial compensation that reflected the severity of the violations, policy changes that would be legally binding, and personal consequences for the agents who had traumatized their family. The federal government's initial settlement offers were insulting. Department of Justice attorneys proposed minimal financial compensation and refused to admit any wrongdoing by federal agents. They characterized the incident as an unfortunate misunderstanding rather than a deliberate violation of civil rights. Martinez rejected these offers immediately. She had video evidence of federal agents threatening medical personnel with weapons while denying care to a laboring woman. She had documentation showing that proper procedures had been ignored and that Carmen's legal status had never been properly verified. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a clear violation of constitutional rights that demanded significant consequences. The case was headed for trial, and both sides began preparing for what would be a highly publicized legal battle. The government would have to defend the actions of agents who had drawn weapons in a hospital maternity ward. Carmen's legal team would present evidence of systematic problems that went far beyond one bad arrest. As the first anniversary of her daughter's birth approached, Carmen reflected on how much her life had changed. She had returned to work at the hospital, but the experience had transformed her perspective on justice and advocacy. She began speaking at conferences about immigrant rights and working with organizations that supported other victims of federal enforcement overreach. The legal battle was far from over, but Carmen had already achieved something important. Her courage in standing up to injustice had exposed problems that might have remained hidden and given hope to others who face similar challenges. The jury's verdict came back unanimous: $17 million in damages, the largest civil rights settlement in immigration enforcement history. But the money was never really the point. Carmen had proven that even federal agents aren't above the law when they violate basic human dignity. Agent Kellerman was fired and lost his federal law enforcement certification permanently. He couldn't work in security or any position requiring a background check. His pension was frozen pending criminal investigation. The partner who finally did the right thing kept his job but was demoted and transferred to desk duty far from any enforcement operations. The hospital implemented new protocols requiring administrative approval before any law enforcement arrests on their premises. Dr. Thompson received a national award for medical ethics and continues to deliver babies while advocating for patient rights. The nursing staff who stood up to armed federal agents became symbols of courage in their profession. Carmen's daughter is now 3 years old and healthy. Carmen used her settlement money to establish a legal defense fund for immigrant workers facing similar targeting. She still works at the same hospital, still helps bring new life into the world, but now she also travels the country speaking about civil rights and the importance of standing up to injustice. The case forced ICE to change their policies on arresting pregnant women and conducting workplace raids without proper verification. Training programs now include specific protocols for sensitive locations and vulnerable populations. It's not perfect, but it's progress that came directly from one woman's refusal to accept being treated as less than human. Sometimes justice takes time, but when brave people fight for what's right, change does come. Carmen's story proves that even in our darkest moments, even when facing overwhelming power and authority, truth and dignity can still prevail. This case was disturbing, but the one on the right ends in a way no one expects.
Welcome back. We are here to relentlessly pursue the truth and hold those in power accountable. Because while words can be twisted, the records simply do not lie. Thank you for joining us today.